so I guess I'm just confused what's going through the satellite. But I guess like Jim routed my pterodactyl. I guess I don't know if you could do that. Well, all right then. But I think we should be. I think it was set at 420p, and I guess it didn't say or say it was fine. But I think we should be all set now. So right now I set it to be live, and the mic seems to be working. So I think we're all set. Yeah. Let's see. I can't like check it at 6:30 and see if it sounds as bad as it usually does. Okay, but I think that's what it was. Cause I opened up the pterodactyl and it was a terminal and it was 420 for some reason. So that probably was the issue, which is weird. Unless I'll check something else and reset, but I don't think so. Just gonna broadcast setting. Okay, good. Yeah. Well, you know what? That's okay. Okay, yeah. I'll let the first thing go. Okay, bye. All right, thanks, Nancy. All right, see you guys out.
And Mike went home today with a sick child. So I don't know, Adam, if it's on or if it's off.
All right.
I think it's
going to be okay. I checked with Karen.
You what?
I think it's going to be okay if we don't hit this deadline. It could be on like another 2 months. So
well,
don't worry about it.
I think we might, at some point, just have to go with the most, who we can get the most of. You know, because it's looking, it's not looking good to for getting everyone there all at once.
Call to order, a little less than promptly for the Montpelier-Roxbury Board of School Directors meeting. The first agenda item is public comment. I'm guessing most of you are here to talk about transportation. Who's here to talk about transportation? Who's here to talk about something else? So all transportation. What do you feel about having a public comment period before the transportation discussion at 7:20? So it's a continuous discussion. Is everyone okay with that, or? I mean, you can say anything now, but I was thinking of adding a second one, so it's a continuous discussion, and we can get comment and then launch into our discussion. Okay, perfect. Any? Huh? And if anyone else wants to say public comment now, the mic is open. Okay, great. Moving on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? To approve the consent agenda. Second. Any discussion? Everyone read the finance charge and it was okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And next, learning focus. So, Hope and Emma, part 2.
Awesome. So, considering that we were just here last week, we have no new concerns or needs to articulate on behalf of the student body. But we do have some celebrations.
Excellent.
So we just had our Veterans Day parade in town, and so UES students made posters and marched in the parade, and Montpelier High School students stood on the sidelines and supported them.
Also at Montpelier High School, we have a new compost system. It's just moved basically to make it more efficient when we're cleaning up and moving around a bunch.
And today we had our first Scholars Bowl meet at Memorial.
And play mentoring today as well at Main Street Middle School and Union Elementary School.
Tomorrow we have the Misty Mountain Valley Music Festival, which I will be playing in, and that's Thursday and Friday, and it's a good opportunity for a lot of student musicians in the central Vermont area to connect and perform. So, and that's it.
Excellent.
It's great.
Look, we're ahead of schedule
I
already.
know.
You're just amazing at this, Jen. Keep going.
Superintendent's report?
Yeah, mine will be quick and painless as well. This past week, last week actually, I took the leadership team to an RTI summit. It was RTI's Response to Intervention summit, and it is an enormous, very big conference around multi-tier system of supports, which is the same thing as saying response to intervention. It's just what we call it here in Vermont. And it truly put the leadership team on the same course for our belief system around what makes an effective system, as well as have a much clearer idea of the components that need to be in place in order to have an effective system. So that was my goal overall. We've got surveys out to the principals to make sure we've gotten to that goal, and the rest of our leadership time for the next few weeks going forward will be us reflecting and talking about exactly where we are, really specifying goals, and then targeting where each school is currently and what we need to ensure up by the end of this year so that we can really get jump-started on the next year. It was across the board incredibly well received by our leadership team. It was money well spent, and it will help influence our direction going forward. So I was very pleased that we chose to do it as soon as we did. I was going to do it later, and then we changed our mind and said, no, we need to do it now. So I'm really excited about that piece.
I still don't know what RTI means, even though you told me what it means.
Response to intervention, or multi-tiered system of support.
Oh, it's MSS, okay.
Yeah.
MTSS.
Yeah.
Yep, same thing. So I'd be happy to field any questions about that. There's also some policy monitoring reports. Tina asked when I sat down if we have a schedule. So Heather made up a schedule of all the policies that have been adopted. And so I'll monitor those pretty much based on the date that they were adopted. And then we've started the idea of when we will bring policies back to renew and revise. We have a schedule for that as well.
We have a copy of that schedule?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any questions? Comments other than the superintendent's report? Yeah, great, thanks, Libby. So, on to budget. So we're gonna have a discussion about transportation. So why don't we reopen the mic now for public comment?
Do you want to talk a little bit about how public comment is separate from board discussion?
Yes.
I think they're
Yeah.
okay with that.
Yeah, I'll give a little context. First off, I just want to state the board has received quite a bit of comment already in email form. The themes have been quite consistent that there is a need, particularly at the middle school, for expanded busing, that there are sections of town that are simply not walkable, or at least not safely or practically walkable. I'd say we've probably gotten 15 plus such emails, give or take. All supportive. We haven't received, at least I haven't received anyone saying don't expand busing. So with that, open public comment. Public comment is meant for the purpose of the board listening. It's not a dialogue back and forth. So if we're not verbally engaging, it doesn't mean that we're not listening and taking your perspectives into account. So since we've got a fair amount of people, if you can limit it to about a minute apiece, that would be great. So whoever wants to go first, go ahead. And you don't have to, so.
So because of the nature of my job, I'm testifying as a private citizen and not in my capacity as a government official. My son Owen is 10 years old. And
can you introduce yourself?
Sarah Truckle.
Okay.
So my son Owen is 10 years old. He's a student at Main Street Middle School. He was always bus eligible at UES. We live on the top of Berlin Street, so he used to take the bus. This year's been a really big transition for that. Our house is not probably walkable, both from a safety standpoint. He'd have to cross down through the bottom of Berlin Street over to the co-op and then down through town that way. So on days like today where it's icy, there are accidents always at the bottom of Berlin Street, and that's really dangerous. So I think if you know where I live, you could picture that. I also sent around a petition. We had 207 signatures when I checked coming in here, all in support of busing from Montpelier residents, and we did that in a week and a half on Facebook. So we didn't go door to door, we just shared the news, so I think that speaks for itself. I also heard from a previous Montpelier High School student who had stressed their times of walking from Gallison Hill Road and how much they would have appreciated busing, which they've let me share. So if you're okay with it, I can read that.
Sure.
Because I think sometimes the student perspective would be different than those of us parents. So.
And just for perspective, that's up near U32.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, actually they point that out. So they said, as a student who lives on Gallison Hill in Montpelier, the same street as U32 is located, but for some reason still within the Montpelier public school system. This spoke to me. Thankful for the times I had to walk to school were few, but the long hour, at least with many questionable street crossings and conditions, the number of times my parents had to juggle rides or carpooling were innumerable. Buses would have been an amazing alternative for those kids who live in the outskirts of town, and thank you for your thoughts on this matter. So I think there's a lot of support from parents. I think there's support from students who are actually in the conditions now where they're walking or they're seeing their parents struggling to carpool. And I also think, we read in the news tragic stories of kids getting hit, and kids getting hit on, lining up to wait for a bus. I can't imagine how much more unsafe it is for them to have to walk across really busy roads. So that's my piece.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'll go next. My name's Carrie Saylor. My family's Montpelier residents. We live up off of Town Hill Road. We live beyond the end of the sidewalk, but close enough that we can kind of scuttle along the edge and get to the sidewalk relatively easily. But we've only had that sidewalk for about 2 years. I have always lived, I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. So they're both in Union. They both ride the bus on a regular basis. Maybe not every single day, but I would say 90% of the time. I work in Montpelier, and I have, with a few exceptions, for the past 18 years. I used to walk to work, and the first winter that we lived there, I walked to work and realized that the snowbanks were so big on the side of the road that they went right into Town Hill Road, and I actually had to several times dive into a snowbank to get out of the way of oncoming traffic. Knowing that my children would have to do that, even for a few feet on their way to school on a winter day, is really terrifying. So I can't imagine that I would ask them to walk the 1 3/4 miles that it takes to get to school. Occasionally in the spring and fall, I will walk with them. It takes about 45 minutes on a really nice day to get the whole way to Union Elementary School with both of my kids. That's a really long walk downhill. We don't walk home because we tried to once and it took us 1 hour and 20 minutes. That's a lot of time for a 10-year-old kid to be alone by themselves wandering around town, particularly in a space where there really aren't a lot of people. Town Hill Road is mostly vehicles. There's no one, there are no neighbors looking out for people. It's just kind of a road that connects Montpelier to Route 2. I've also brought some comments from some other folks who couldn't make it tonight, and I hope that you'll give me a quick second to just share some of their points. Suzanne Eikenberry lives on Elm Street and brought up a few points for me. She actually is able to walk her son to school every day. She's not within the bus route, but she asked that I point out that she strongly supports creating bus service for the middle school because the large number of people dropping off their children at Main Street Middle School actually makes it a walking hazard for people walking to school, either children walking to the elementary school or children walking to the middle school. They'll often go to Franklin Street and cross by the middle school because there's a crossing guard there, but even in that case, it's still often really difficult to see short people crossing the road. So that's a danger not just for the students who are there, but for the people driving and anyone walking across the street. The same thing, she said they often bike, and the same thing is an issue because bike crossing is even more dangerous. And she said that often the car line at both of the schools, both Union and the middle school, is actually, she said an environmental hazard, but also her son has asthma, and he'll often get an asthma attack if it's a really cloudy day, and there's a lot of exhaust. And much of that car line is caused by parents not being able to leave their elementary school child at home to catch the elementary school bus because there's no middle school bus, so they have to bring the middle school student down. So it's this catch-22 that parents are in with scheduling that causes this weird transportation crunch around both schools, not just the middle school. So adding a middle school bus would allow parents to actually put more kids on the elementary school bus and have higher usage for that too. And then another parent asked me to share just one more thing, and I don't want to take too much time, but Sue Paris wanted to be here tonight. Her son Erickson just graduated from Montpelier High School, I believe last year. She has a child about to go into 5th grade, and they live on Hackmore Road, which is at the end of Town Hill Road. They have no sidewalk. There's a very sharp S-curve with no shoulders and low visibility, and another road, Murray Road, coming right into it. That's the only space that her son will have to walk to school. It's absolutely impossible to walk. On a nice day in the summer, it's extremely dangerous. And in the winter, I just can't imagine putting a child there. So if he didn't walk that way, he would have to walk through people's backyards, scuttle over to Sabin's pasture, go down to Berry Street. It would be a really roundabout way to get a kid to school safely. And for 2 parents who are working, she and her husband both work, but she has an off schedule. She's a midwife, and she's delivering a baby right now and can't be here. She would like to, but for her with an unpredictable schedule, it's often very difficult for her to tell if she'll even be home to take her kids to school. and having a bus that was reliably there at a scheduled time to pick up her children would make it a lot easier for both parents in her household to continue working. So those are my points. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks.
Hi,
You're all good.
I'm okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Rosenthal. I'm a parent of a 10th grader and a 5th grader. I think since my 5th grader's in school, they've been able to take the bus for 1 year when they were both at elementary school together when the 5th grade was at the elementary school. Other than that, I have been shuttling my kids back and forth since then, either mainly from what Carrie had said before, because you can't have my younger one wait for the bus and get the other child to school on time. So my mornings start with having to drive both kids to school and doing it used to be UES and then Main Street, and I'm gonna just echo what everybody else says. It's very congested. There's small streets. It's hard to get your kids around UES and middle school safely, and it causes a hazard for all of the walkers as well. What we know, and what there's been research to show, and I didn't bring it today, I apologize, I can get it to the board, is that the research shows that when kids take buses, all kids are safe. You got the stop sign that goes with the bus, more kids are transporting that way, so you have less just traffic around, and the kids coming and going are safer. So all of our children will be safer if we have school buses, and I will bring that I will send that information to everyone. And I mean, we all know that idling cars around UES and Main Street Middle School is not good for anyone. Asthmatic kids, the climate, our whole community, our whole planet. So that's another piece I wanted to say. But I think for me, one of the biggest issues is equity. As we know, most of the houses in the walkable parts of town are more expensive to live in, and the houses in Montpelier on the outskirts of town are more for lower to middle class families who are working hard to make money for their family, to support their family. And we don't have that, and people on the outskirts of town, and I'll say where I live in a minute, don't have that same luxury as other families to be able to have their kids just go to school on their own. We have to transport our kids. There's no way, Carrie made that clear, Sarah made that clear, I could keep telling you where I live and what's going on, but it's not walkable. That's just the reality of it. I live at the top of Berlin Street, past the sidewalks, right where Sherwood meets Berlin. It is extremely dangerous. There's traffic, there's accidents there quite frequently. It's when people start just flying by because they're getting to the Berlin border. It's just not safe. There's no way I can let my little guy go. I can't let him cross the street to go visit his buddy at his house. So it's safety, but it really is putting families who are at a lower income at a disadvantage of other families. I have not been able to work full time. Last year I tried for a year because I had busing for 1 more year for my 5th grader, and I only had to worry about my high school student getting to school. But now with the lack of consistent after school programming at Main Street and morning programming, I'm really stuck. And I think I'm not the only family in that situation. So I think it's very important for the board to consider, is Montpelier a community for everyone? Are we supporting all of the children who attend schools here? And I really feel like that is including the high school. Are we fair? Are we caring as much about these kids, their safety, their families' financial well-being? And are we really caring about the environment? I think we need to put it, we really all have to take care of all of our kids and all of us. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi there, I'm Kathleen Bryant. I have a daughter who's in 8th and a daughter who's in 10th, and we live out on Elm Street. And we started having this conversation with the board about 6 years ago. And I echo what everyone else has said in terms of being far enough out that it's hard for my kids to walk. They bike as much as they can, but obviously now we can't do that. And I think it's really affected decisions about our careers and our work, and my husband and I haven't been able to work full time because we have to always be there to take our kids back and forth. And I just wanted to speak to that I think that it affects people's work schedules, and I think everybody else has questions about high school kids, would they take the bus? And I definitely think that they would, so I just want to say that I think it's for everybody. It needs to not just be the middle school, but the high school as well, and be really inclusive of everyone, so thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Gendron, and I have 3 kids. One is in preschool, but not at Union, and then I have a first grader and a 4th grader right now. So, you know, with a child who's going to be going to middle school next year, this really interests me, and it has since I moved to town. But we live up Northfield Street off of Colonial Drive. It's about a 1.5 miles to the middle school, and there are sidewalks, which I'm grateful for. They just redid them in the past couple years, but regardless, you know, when you get to the bottom of Northfield Street, there's a 4-lane highway, more or less. So that, even with the crossing signals, it still makes me very nervous for my will-be 10-year-old at that time. So, you know, people don't always stop, and they go right on red, even when the blinking thing, I see it all the time. And so that makes me quite nervous, and it's 1.5 miles is pretty far in the snow and the wetness and down a steep hill in snow and rain and whatnot. So that's one of my concerns, and you know, this affects me, and like others have said, I feel like my careers and my work schedule. I mean, you know, my husband goes to work very early. I should be at work by 8 o'clock so that I can take care of patients, but you know, running late for that is quite stressful, but I want to be able to continue to serve you know, people when they're ill. So, you know, it's just quite stressful. And then I was excited by the idea that there were maybe some morning programs at Main Street Middle School, but now I understand those have ended. So there's not really any early drop-off that's an option. And the idea of driving into that area to drop my kids off seems really intimidating. There's so many cars, and sometimes, like, I don't even know what to do. Like, I find myself in that area on occasion in the morning, and there's so much going on that, you know, even for a kid to be crossing through there seems quite scary, and that a bus drop-off would be a lot safer. And, you know, just seeing the buses go by, I've never been on them to count the numbers, but they don't look from the outside particularly full, that maybe there is room for some middle schoolers, you know, for my middle schooler to get on the bus with my elementary student. Maybe it wouldn't work out that way, but maybe that would be the possibility. Just look at the other points I had made of. And, you know, I had thought about the idea of the public taking the public transportation bus, but my understanding is that service that goes down Northfield Street is going to be possibly changing and no longer going down our road. And maybe everything is going to be going out of National Life instead, and then down this way. So that doesn't seem like an option either for my child, and my children to be coming through. So thank you for your consideration. I think it's, you know, would be a great service to all parents, not just working parents. You know, if you say have a newborn baby at home or something like that, but you gotta scuttle your, you know, your middle schooler, that's a lot of stress as well. And it seems like we should be able to offer some things. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy.
I guess I can speak again. My name is Jim Hutton. I've obviously been before you guys a number of other times. I think at this point people have made the point that transportation is desired and needed beyond elementary school. The transportation committee that I was a part of, I think, went through a very thoughtful process of you know, trying to figure out why there's this need. You know, okay, when the kid turns 10, they can't automatically just get themselves around town. We know that there's a need for transportation because we have 3 buses that do 3 bus routes, and they're full. They're essentially full. I think Libby and Jim both at this point have checked that. So we know there's a need. Just because those kids go into 5th grade or just because they come to the high school doesn't mean that they no longer need that transportation. So I appreciate you guys finally, really taking this topic under consideration and moving forward with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone. So, do you want to give an update on what you've been looking at and what you've been considering, or do we want to get quick reactions of the board first?
Probably reactions, yeah.
Yeah. Reactions?
My only question, I think, is has there been much consideration about the equity with Roxbury? It's something that we have, we talk about equity between where folks live and incomes and all that kind of thing. And we kind of made a statement early on when we did the merger that we'd be okay with not busing Roxbury families directly from their doors, but instead having them show up at a concentration location where we could pick folks up and then get them in here from there. So using kind of a hub system in that way. I think we felt, I think the Roxbury folks felt like that was adequate, but it's certainly a very different model than what we have in Montpelier, and we're talking about changing the Montpelier model to make it even more, offer even more services in Montpelier, and I really have some concerns about what does this mean for, I think all the parents here and what we've heard from our Montpelier folks and advocating for Montpelier equity within Montpelier, and I think that it's our job as a board to be considering equity district-wide. So we just have to really make sure it passes that filter for us.
Thoughts or comments?
Maybe just to take Steve's comment just a little bit farther, I want to make sure Main Street Middle School has really been the focus of a lot of the feedback we've received as a board so far. But again, whole district, all the schools, let's not just focus the conversation strictly on Main Street Middle School. All the elementaries, high school, middle school, we really need to consider the entire picture.
And I would add that I think you've got a good point, Steve. And I also, from everything I know about Roxbury busing, I'm not sure where it comes from. If it's the bus company or who makes that decision around what parts of the town are passable by bus or not. And so there's sort of that logistical element that perhaps can't be helped. And then the other side of the coin is that Roxbury and Montpelier by nature are different geographically, and population density. And so I would be interested in the administration exploring all the possibilities within Roxbury as far as like how likely is it that we could bus, every kid from their door. However, my understanding is that's never happened, and it's partly because of the distance between, you've got 5 students spread out, from one end of the town to the other. So in some ways it's hard to have equal, it's like you can't have exactly the same thing for the 2 different towns because there's just differences in the towns. Or maybe you can, but as far as, I'm not sure we can compare them on the same exact plane.
Becky, and then Bridget.
My last one graduated last year, but for years, I'm very sympathetic to what happens to your career when your children are not able to take the bus. I was working in Montpelier for the most part, and the bus was great for Union, and then they transitioned to middle school, and I wound up taking I had a big car, and so I wound up caravanning 4 other kids to school. And I was able to do that for a couple of years, but then my work closed its Montpelier office and moved everybody to Burlington, and I wound up having to find a new job because I I could not figure out how to get my kids to school and get to work. And I think that happens a lot around here, and I think it's actually born more, if I may say so, by single parents. I didn't have an option. I didn't have anybody else to pick up the slack for me. So, speaking as a parent, separate from school board, I would really like to see this move forward.
Bridget?
I just wanted to respond to some of the other thread about the district-wide approach, to just say that I don't think transportation is ever going to be a one-size-fits-all solution in a rural state. And although it's important to be looking at the district as a whole, I don't think that necessarily means that you implement the same approach in every part of the district, because the nature of the area, the age of the kids, the nature of the school, and whether it's an open campus and kids are going all day versus a fixed schedule, all of those things are going to matter when you make transportation choices. So, yes, big picture, but not necessarily identical solutions all the way across the district and across every school.
I think I'll say, I do live at the top of Berlin Street, that we don't now necessarily pick you up at your door. So considering the possibility of pickup places that were closer, so you weren't walking 1.5 miles, but were closer to your house, might be a possibility.
Like where Berlin and Hebert come together for that
Right.
neighborhood.
That happens already. Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's not one.
Actually, it feels like the Roxbury framework could probably be applied in the Montpelier situation also.
Well, I'm extremely sympathetic to this as an individual who walks a mile to and from work every day and fell twice on my way to work today. And fortunately, a neighbor came by and gave me a ride on the icy streets, and I was definitely thinking of our students as I was heading into the office today. One thing, though, that I keep thinking about throughout this all, and it ties into some of what Steve and Bridget were just talking about, is whatever approach we take, and I'm sure this is on Libby's mind and the administration's mind, I really want us to also consider the environmental sustainability of it. If we have a bus that's picking up 3 or 5 kids and isn't totally full, I want to be able to provide a transportation solution, whatever it is, but however we do it, I want it to be environmentally and economically sustainable for our community. And I think there are plenty of options to do that, but that's my piece on that.
And to add to that, I wonder, and we haven't heard from Libby, but whether you talked about the bus system that's the city bus system, whether we can't talk to city bus systems, so perhaps they could help us out with this issue. I don't know.
I've talked to them already, and it's pretty much a moot point. They're not going to change their system for us. They'd have to do that. They made that pretty clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, and we've been trying to engage them for a while because it's.
I knew, and
it's
That's the way Burlington gets their children to school. Public transportation.
A lot of cities do that.
Yeah. Right.
Look, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but a potential data question. So thinking about the parents and kids and buses and cars, do you have any idea how we're doing for the students in UES and Main Street Middle School getting to school on time? Do we have?
I don't have exact data. I couldn't pull out exact numbers from my head. I would say that there's probably a bit of lateness because of transportation issues for kids on their own to get themselves to school with lots of fun places to stop in. Yeah, distractions might be a good word. Particularly here at the high school, but a little bit at the middle school too. I'd have to ask Pam and Mike for exact numbers around that, and we wouldn't be able to name the exact reason.
Sure, if it changes throughout the year, in December and January when the streets are really nasty, if it gets worse, or better in the spring when it's not.
I don't know if we could really nail it down to that grain size, but I could ask their perspective, and I can imagine what they say.
I was just trying to figure out whether or not there was something to support. Yes, it's not working at all.
Yeah. Just anecdotally, I mean, when you've got a day like today, I was. Yeah, I mean, I passed by Union after dropping off my child at Main Street at 8:18, and there was a line pretty much all the way down School Street of people waiting to drop their kids off, and that was 3 minutes after start. And
Today's Wednesdays,
the walking school bus, which is kind of the one like guided walking option, was also about at Mangy's, so they were going to be 5 minutes late. And, the kids were slipping all over the place. So it was, weather definitely a big force. Adam.
Sorry, that was a bit rude of me. On Wednesdays, they do start 20 minutes later at MSMS. I don't know about UES.
UES starts at the same time, and MSMS starts at
8:20 on Wednesdays, I believe.
8:20 or 8:15.
8:15.
8:15.
This morning.
Other questions or comments? I'll just say, as probably a lot of you know, I run a lot, and I've been on all the roads and kind of all the the far ends of Montpelier in all sorts of conditions, and places like Allison Hill Road, Bliss Road. There's no way you can safely walk. A 10-year-old can safely walk from some of those places to school. So there are real safety issues and equity issues too. That's where a lot of the more affordable housing is. I think I don't have data to back this up, but my guess is there's probably higher levels of single-parent homes in some of those areas. So the challenges to the families that live in some of the places that are more challenging to begin with, I think are steeper. Are you okay telling us
Yeah,
what you've looked at?
And I would echo that. Carrie was nice enough to drive me around Montpelier. And I was amazed that we have such a rural city in some spots. I didn't know that. It was great. So I've been looking into, Grant and I have been looking into a couple different options. And we have a meeting actually with Stacy at STA, which is our busing company, on Tuesday. And the only reason why it's on Tuesday because it was the first time that Stacy, Grant, and I could get in a room together based on schedules. And I also have Jim and I have a meeting on Tuesday morning with several people who were here that was just planned for Main Street Middle School. We have budgeted for 2 buses. We don't know if we'll need 2 buses, right? The high school question is interesting because we haven't necessarily dug into high school as of yet. And I think if talking to Mike McCraith, I'm not sure how much of maybe in the 9th grade for our high school students, there'd be a desire or a need. High school's just a different beast for many things you pointed out, Bridget, of kids coming and going and different places that they're going to and the wonderful community programs that we have here at the high school. It's just a different world. And we have students from other schools for school choice coming in as well. So I'm not sure about the high school. We haven't necessarily put that on our radar just yet. If the board tells me to, then we will. We've really been focusing around Main Street and those far corners of our town. And we're going to propose to Stacy to not necessarily pick up every Main Street middle schooler, but the ones who live outside of certain areas of our town. That's what we're going to propose, and we would change the bus routes of UES so that so it would even out the kids on the buses. We wouldn't just add to the current UES route. So what we're going to propose to her is if we add more buses, that would level out more UES, that would thin out the UES kiddos on those buses so we could fit Main Street middle school kids on them as well.
We do, in our policy now, don't we not pick up closer to school?
We pick up all our UES kids have access to the bus, whether they take that or not. Yeah, whether they choose to do that or not.
No, I think there's
no bus routes in
No?
the first mile or whatever.
Oh, okay, then I must have
Yeah.
Stacy told me that.
Because I was thinking if you think a mile out for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not an even mile.
Yeah, that's the problem. Our town's not that even. You know?
Well, but I mean, if we've got a parameter determined by I don't know what for the little kids, then it seems like that could be also
a parameter for the older kids, yeah. And we very well could think that way, right? There are places like, I don't want to butcher the street, is it Berry Street? That is pretty city-like still, and with a relatively easy way to get to town. That could be a mile and mile 0.3 outside of the school or away from Main Street Middle School, but it's still a pretty easy walk through town to get there. So there's some things to consider. Do you still pick up kids out there or not? So there's just many things to consider in this, and I want to talk to Stacy to see if our plan is even a viable one for the bus company. Another option is to change school times considerably and do 2 bus routes. So pick up elementary school kids, get them to school, then pick up middle school kids, get them to school. That's another option. I think if the principals watch this video and hear me suggest that option, they'd be shaking, because that's, changing school schedules is like, that's a big deal. So how would we do that well is, would be a very big question for us. That would change a lot of things in the school system. So there's multiple options that we're considering. We have to get with the bus company now to say what's the most feasible, economically sustainable, and best for our kids.
I guess I just have one question. When you're figuring it out, have you assessed at Union how many kids would actually wind up on the bus if there were buses for the middle school too? Like in the there's many parents in the situation I'm in where my elementary school student couldn't take the bus because I had to bring the other one to Main Street. So I'm thinking that your bus use is going to get higher at Union, and I didn't know if that was factored in.
Not yet.
Thinking, but it will change the bus ridership.
What we do know from Union, from the STA, is that, because we asked them if our buses were full, if there were any room just on the Union buses, right? And they said that if every kid were on the bus, they would be full. So it's not just adding kids onto the buses we already have.
I guess I'm a little not clear on process here in terms, I mean, we definitely want to delegate the fine decision-making to the administration on this, but we want to have it, since we are in the process of policy rewrite, we're also thinking about the values that come to this and how those values guide your decision-making. And I guess I'm sensitive to the values you all are kind of considering as you put this together, where those values come from and which values you're prioritizing over others. I'm really concerned about this Roxbury thing, and I think that I would like us to make sure that we have really processed that. We have no participation from the Roxbury community in this conversation. Even our language in this is very much about our town rather than our towns. And I really think that we need to be cautious about moving forward with a new busing expenditure without having a really rational value system that creates whatever we create. In other words, we need to basically be able to document why we're doing it the way we're doing it. So I just want to caution us not to do this because we're hearing a lot of concern about this in the community right now, but that, I think that most of us would like to bus everyone. And that we believe that it's environmentally better and it's better for equity and all those other reasons. And the problem is we're actually leaving a lot of people out of the busing, and we're having to choose who we're leaving out. So I don't know if it's a question so much, it's just a caution, is just that we can all make sure that we agree on the values we're using as we go forward.
I think I would need to know more about that, because I'm not positive I don't know what you mean when you say which Roxbury students were leaving off buses. And I'm not sure, I haven't heard, while I've heard from Montpelier community members, I've heard from Roxbury community members, but more because the bus is late, sometimes on crappy weather, like yesterday, or the bus driver was driving too fast, but not in terms of the service that we're offering them, so I need to know more.
Right, no, and all I mean by that is that, if a parent there's an expectation for, if we want to talk about the equity of, where people live and their income, we have to look at Roxbury as an even lower income community than Montpelier in many areas. And, in terms of the requirement in the economics of a family unit, in terms of having to allocate time to move their children around, their kids are not going to be walking from their home to the Roxbury Village School so that they can get picked up by a bus. They're going to be dropped off there. I mean, maybe there are some kids, I'm sure there's some kids close in who do that, but in many cases the parents are still basically busing their own kids in their family trucks and cars. And so what we want to do is think about how much are we making them do that, and whether that's consistent with what we're doing in Montpelier also. If they're driving them 2 minutes and there's no big deal, that's great. But it's just, I just want to make sure we're doing apples to apples. You know, the density questions, the feasibility of those things are important from an economics perspective, but not so much from an equity perspective.
I think it's interesting that you haven't heard from Roxbury, because with the new system, new busing, it seems like if what we're doing now wasn't working, we would have heard, or they would have heard, but I don't know that.
And it is safe to say that for the middle school and the high school families, what we have right now is a huge load off of those families.
Right. We've moved in that direction with
them.
them.
We're moving in that direction. And it really is, I don't think there is a clear answer on how we're going to be able to compare the equity between the two communities on this, because it's not practical for a Roxbury bus to go door to door and pick up all the kids. It's just not practical.
Well, like in bud season,
could the bus even make it doable?
Right. It was only 4 years ago that the bus actually went on a single dirt road in town. Before that, it was picking up the children on Highway 12A or 12. They had certain locations where the bus would stop and pick the kids up. I was thinking to myself in some of this conversation, Monday, 2 days ago, there was a hiccup with the bus. The bus driver thought it was a holiday and didn't it's a strange morning, waiting at the bottom of the road, waiting for the bus that didn't come.
That's classic.
But the interesting thing is, when I asked my son, after I picked him up at the bottom of the hill for the walk up, we were talking, how did school go? Were there any kids out because the bus wasn't there? He said, no, everybody in his class was there. And again,
we had 5 students absent that day. I do know that.
Were there some?
Yeah, there was 5 students absent, but who knows why they were absent.
Sorry, 6-year-old perspective is kind of.
Exactly, that probably is pretty typical for their student population.
Yeah, but it really is. I mean, a lot of the parents tonight have said, a lot of the parents on the feedback we've heard before, it's tough managing your schedule to get the kids here and get the kids there. It really is different in Roxbury when, if you choose to live in Roxbury, you're choosing to drive at some point in time. And not that it's easier necessarily because you've made that decision, but I think ultimately most families living up on the hill somewhere know that they are going to be driving and they'll be working schedules out. Whether or not that's always, it's not always easy. It's definitely not. I know that there are families who've had a hard time getting their kids to preschool in town. I think you and I may have a couple conversations about busing for preschool kids to make sure we have some clear expectations there. But I do know that in the past maybe 4 or 5 years, we have heard from families that, you know, if they couldn't use the village school, they wouldn't be able to get their kids to preschool somewhere else. So yes, transportation is a tough thing.
I guess, but we're expecting those parents to, there's this different set of expectations, right? So we're saying that we would expect a Roxbury parent to just handle it.
To make
But
accommodations.
we wouldn't expect a Montpelier parent to handle it. And I don't think that anyone's saying that necessarily, but it's really close to that. And I think that I think that we've added busing services for Roxbury in the merger of the towns. So what we've got is some really goodwill right now, I think, and we've made a good step forward for everyone. And I think we want to do that for Montpelier too. And the question is, does that then throw that out of whack again? And now all of a sudden we hear from and say, hey, but you know, you're adding tax dollars, Roxbury tax dollars, to do this, and you know, does it seem like an equitable thing? So I think I'm just wanting to be that kind of conscience a little bit about, are we truly being equitable in terms of, you know, if we talk about the economics of family income and distance from schools and the burden we're placing on single parents or the burden we're placing on people who have to think about their jobs and how that equity, you know, it is still affecting those Roxbury families too. And to the credit of Roxbury residents throughout this entire merger process, they have said, we have low expectations. You know, and we've heard that over and over again when it comes to transport. We have low expectations. So, you know, there's not like a big selfish demand or anything from Roxbury. It's not that.
I'm not sure they said they had low expectations.
I don't mean about the whole school system, but the transportation.
Well, but I think they were
said that.
used to, I think Vermont is like the dilemma we're in. There are rural parts of Vermont. If you live out on a dirt road, I can tell you, the buses don't go there because they can't during 2 seasons of the year. That would be the mud seasons. So, you know, equitable is difficult.
Yeah, they did say they were Montpelier residents were actually advocating for more busing for Roxbury during the merger conversations. Then we actually brought it up as the problem, like, hey, how are we going to do equity in transportation? How is that going to work? And the Roxbury were like, we don't really have equity in transportation. It's just the way it is when you live in a rural town. And we're like, yeah, but if we're gonna all be together, we're gonna have some equity in transportation, and we're gonna do, the after-school bus, the extracurricular bus, like, that was something that the Montpelier folks really insisted on in that process. So, I think just to be consistent, I want to make sure we think of these two towns as one district.
I actually forgot that piece of, sorry, Ryan, I forgot that piece of the planning from earlier that I just thought of, the Colonial Drive area there. Like that Roxbury bus already passes through it, and that's certainly not a full bus. So, so that group of kids could easily, so when we're talking about where we'd be picking up, that, we already used that bus. So
yeah.
we'd already have that option. I just forgot about that part of the plan, sorry.
No, that's actually part of the point that I wanted to make in terms of equity. I have had a conversation with a couple folks in town, and this has come up. Yes, the bus coming from Roxbury is going to be coming through Montpelier, it's going to be going past houses, and obviously the Roxbury kids are going to be going for a longer bus ride. It's inherent by nature. But I do think we need to be careful to not start using that bus to make a ton of stops in town and essentially start an entire new route.
I think what you could do, and I have to talk to Stacy, this is beyond my pay grade.
One or two big,
Yeah,
right.
you stop right at the bottom of Colonial Drive, where those neighborhoods let out for the middle schoolers, and just have the middle schoolers get on, because it goes up into the neighborhoods with the UES bus, but with the middle schoolers, just stop at the end and have them get on at the end, so it's not considerable.
So the concern is just making it even longer?
Yeah.
Is that
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just had two pieces, you had talked about the map. I had the opportunity to sit with Chris Hennessy 5 years ago, and there are actually, the school district actually has maps with the circles, the radius around each school drawn out, and that was used, I don't know, probably in the 90s or the 80s to determine which kids would, could walk, and which kids would be bused. And then I think there's consideration for difficult streets and neighborhoods. Yeah. But there are some maps in existence that we are, last I know, Chris Hennessy and Brian had, Rick had, they exist. And just the other point being, we do not, nobody in the town, I think at this point, has ever expected door-to-door service. It doesn't happen now. Our kids go to school buses, bus stops is the word I was looking for. So going to bus stops. And honestly, I don't think anyone's been asking for anything, in a lot of respects, anything new. We started in the school system, these kids got bused to school, and all of a sudden the buses disappeared. So, we had buses, and then they get taken away at an age. So it wasn't that you're adding new bus routes, it's just incorporating the other two schools into the same existing bus routes.
And the whole sibling thing is really an amazing factor in all this, and you hear it from a lot of parents. It'll be true for anyone, the kind of the lunacy of it all with the sibling issue.
We usually don't call the crowd.
I think it's interesting to get a conversation around equity, because when you read about equity in white papers and you research it, or you think about it from a policy perspective, equity doesn't always mean equal, right? It doesn't always mean the same. It means, well, actually, I should have reversed that. It doesn't mean the same. It's providing equal access when you think about it from that perspective. I know for me as a Montpelier parent, I would have no problem with my child going across the street. I mean, I live right across from Hebert, if they had a group stop there. But I think when you're talking about values, I can see for me as a parent where I'm putting my #1 value is safety. And that's what it comes down to for me of why I want to see busing at Main Street Middle School, because I truly do not feel like my child has a safe way to get to school unless I drop him off. And I would like to see the conversation be more centered around those values around safety, and not so much about, I think we have opportunities for public comment. That's such a great process. People are here, people wrote letters, people have submitted emails, people have spoken to every one of us who's on the transportation committee. But I think we're gonna have that opportunity to have that discussion if that's something that we move forward with. But when you think about values, I think about safety, and that to me is the center of all of the comments that I've heard. And that's the one thing I think we can all agree, that we don't wanna see a child get hit crossing a street. And I saw a bus in Montpelier the other day where they had the stop sign, and the kids were running out in front of the bus without the stop sign up because traffic was just so hectic. So we already have problems with safety as it is now, and I just think it's important to bring back value. I think that's where parents really are concerned, is looking at these icy days and sitting there thinking, how is my child gonna get there? You wouldn't wanna walk the mile this morning, your neighbor picked you up. I don't want my son getting in a car with a stranger, but any decent human being would do that. We tell our kids over and over again, don't talk to strangers. Make sure you're aware of who you're with. Unfortunately, we live in that world. So that's, I think when you talk about values, you have to think about the values that affect all of our students.
And I just want to piggyback on that. It affects the
I've lost control.
It affects the safety of all the students, because of the congestion around those schools, including the Roxbury students coming in and out of their buses too. There was just so much congestion around all those schools that there was a lot of safety issues for all students that are coming and going into the Montpelier schools.
And I'd love to know why there's not more talk about the high school too, because I see that being an issue too. You know, I mean, I don't think that high school kids can get safely to school most of the time, you know, with living 2 miles out of town, and I think that affects work too. So I would love to see more conversation at the upper ends, and just kind of surprised that hasn't been part of this too.
So I'm gonna, thank you. I let public comments slip a little bit. Normally we don't do that, but the comments you all raised are very good. So normally we keep public comment to public comment. But thank you. Bridget.
Since the topic is transportation and not just busing, I just wanted to raise something and not to ask for an answer now, but some input at some point as the budget is going, about the crossing guard issue and having more crossing guards for because I just wanted to again, not putting anyone on the spot because I didn't read it ahead of time, but it is another transportation and safety issue. We'd be using some input on through the process.
In my understanding of that, it's just hard to get and retain people. We've got a few gems who, but you know, some crossing guards come and go. Like for instance, for a while we didn't have one at School Street and Main Street, and now we do. And
there used to be one at Elm Street.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been for a long time. And I was not trying to start the discussion.
There could really be a couple more beyond that.
Yeah.
Got it in red.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Well, we haven't talked really about the activities bus that goes to Roxbury after, you know, some of the after-school activities at the middle school. But I do think that's also an important service to continue. And I've talked to folks about usage and all of that and challenges around that. But I think that's one piece where equity, is where it's something that Montpelier's not going to have, but that Roxbury, that it can be really important for Roxbury for that equal access to the extracurriculars.
Well, and I think that's where we get where equity doesn't mean equal. I mean, that's, you know, by its nature, I mean, even if we do funnel points in Montpelier, those points are probably going to be on average shorter than funnel points in Roxbury. But there's also things like nobody in Montpelier, even the people, you know, out on Bliss Road, are not going to have an activity bus. So are you thinking you're going to get what you need from STA by budget deadline? Yeah. Great.
We'll have a plan.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for the great input. This has been very helpful, and thanks Libby for being with us. Yes. Ready to move on to board governance? So I just kind of doing a mid-year progress update. I had 2 items for this. One is kind of how committee structure and how we run committees, and then as part of that, some discussion about the negotiations committee and the makeup of that. And then the third is just, or the second is chain of communications. I want to just start with chain of communications and kind of how to communicate with administration members and kind of like what hat you're wearing. The issue, and I think this has kind of been something we did in the past, is there's a pretty loose relationship between communications with the board and communications with administration members, that it didn't always funnel through either the superintendent or the board chair. So there was a lot of kind of communication between board members and principals, or board members and curriculum directors, or board members and special ed directors. The problems with that is it kind of, I think, has created some confusion on the part of the administrators about how that board member is speaking, whether they're speaking on behalf of the board, whether they're speaking individually. Sometimes it's been requests for information that have kind of been taken as directives. So I'd like to tighten that up a little and have requests, if you wanted information from, say, Grant or Mike McCraith or Mary or whomever, kind of as a board member seeking information, to send it to Libby and me, and then we can forward it on and just make sure it all gets funneled. If you're speaking as a parent, of course you can go to directly whoever you want to go to. I think given that the line between a board member and a community member is pretty hard to distinguish once you're a board member, I think the only way you should go directly to an administration member other than Libby is as a parent, and really keep that parent hat on and make sure that your discussion as a parent doesn't slip into a discussion as a board member, which I think can happen if you have like a specific request about something that's going on in the classroom, and then you get a response back, and then that kind of edges into, well, I kind of think this should happen in the school. Kind of be careful of that and where those lines are. So I just wanted to kind of, set those lines are. I think it'll be easier on the administration. I think it'll clear up any lines about whether you're speaking as an individual or as a board member, and kind of Libby and I can clear that up when we pass the request along. And I think it'll just be neater, and I think it's kind of the form that most boards follow, and we just have it for several years. So any questions about that?
Yes, I'd like a clarification, because I thought if I had a question, I sent it to you.
You can send it to, yes.
Not to Libby,
Well,
unless and that I send it to you, you make a decision about whether Libby needs to be brought in, or whether you have the answer to my question.
Yeah. I think it's okay to CC both of us. I'm okay just having it go to me.
Is that what the policy says? Yeah. The policy, no, that it goes to the superintendent, copy to the chair.
I think that's what the policy says, yeah.
You wouldn't have a conversation with somebody without including the board chair.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the main thing is to make sure that Libby and I are at the funnel.
What if you're dealing with, and I realize this is like the exception, but for example, some of the paperwork for becoming a board member, Joanne reached out to me directly because, she just reached out to me directly, and so then I needed to clarify some things with her.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, if it's truly like
logistical,
administrative, but
not only that, she called you, right?
And she also reached out to you. Yeah. I mean, I think if someone reaches out to you, you can answer a question. And if it's really rote administrative, you know, just, can you drop this form off or whatever, I think the line is, you know, err on the side of going through us. And I think that, you know, the danger of kind of thinking something is just a quick administrative question is it might be looked as a directive. Like, you know, I'd like to know this number, but this number might be really complicated. Or, you know, is that a directive? Like, I have to get that number to, you know, him or her right now. So.
And so when we're working on the finance committee with Grant, for example, and I think we're copying Libby on pretty much all those communications. I can't think of any that we didn't. Do you want to be copied on those as well, Jim? Because you might get, I'm just thinking about that, like with some of the subcommittee work, that where there could be, like this past week, for example, with the negotiations committee and with the finance committee, there were a lot of emails bouncing back and forth, and Libby was copied on, I think, all of them, but I don't know that you were.
I wasn't.
And do you really want that to be the case, or no? I'm just trying to.
I think those questions would come to Jim and I, and then we bring them to Grant.
Yeah.
With what Jim's saying.
Yeah, go ahead and copy me. I can always do a quick look and ignore contact Libby and say there seems to be a lot of traffic around this too.
I think that these are all good things. I guess I have a question about to what extent the onus falls on the professional administrators to be able to navigate this also. You know, our roles as community members, parents, board members, they're very fluid in the sense that we're always talking to our neighbors who maybe are also teachers, who are also, or someone who might be a former, you know, whatever, and it's, you know, I think, you know, I mean, I can think my own interactions have been pretty, I usually go in saying, I'm writing this email as a parent today, you know, I'm always very clear about that, but I think that it would be great if administrators were fluent in what those roles are and how the board members do not speak for the board when they're approaching somebody individually. They don't actually even have a right to ask for you to do any research or do anything, frankly. That has to go through their boss, basically. You know, I just want to make sure it's clear that, like, I would really love it if, you know, when I sit down with Pam to go over my daughter's stuff and we start talking about some other issue, that she can say, you know, I want to make it clear right now that X, you know, or that I'm here talking to you as a parent. I mean, you know, it's harder for a teacher, right? They're not an administrator.
Yeah.
Bridget? I guess I think the onus is on the board members.
I think the onus is on the board
And
member
then we really need
too.
to own that, and we need to be careful about it, and we need to respect Libby's authority and her role as a superintendent, and respect our roles.
I don't think it's disrespectful.
Well, I think it is, because, not intentionally or personally, but I just think in terms of how you look at the roles between the board and the superintendent, that if back channels develop with other members of the administrative team, that's circumventing the person who runs the district, and it's not supposed to work that way. So, you know, I think we really have to own that responsibility as board members to make sure we understand and we buy in.
And I think we have to own the power structure too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you are their boss.
Yeah.
And whether you
who's boss?
want to, everybody's
Yeah.
in the district.
I'm not Pam's boss.
Well,
yeah, but
yes,
you're Pam's boss's boss.
Sure,
yeah.
but.
And so but what I'm saying is, when you go in, even if it's not your intention, you have some innate
you have
authority because you're on the board. So you might not mean it that way, but it's hard for somebody not to take it.
Yeah, or to tell you, you know,
yeah, sure.
Stop talking about that because you're a board member.
I get it, but I have a lot of faith in the professionalism of our, especially our administrators, and I think they can easily be trained in that too. I'm not saying we should be abusing it or any of that nonsense, but I'm not even Libby's boss, right? Like, I'm pretty clear on my roles here. I'm only her boss as part of a group, right? So I would have no individual right to even ask her for anything.
No, but
so it's, you know, it's not like I'm trying to abuse something. What I'm doing is I'm saying, these things require that the professionals, the people who are, you know, full-time paid, they should understand these roles also, is all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I think they should understand that, but I think I think the onus should be on us to be very mindful of how our interactions with administrators are taken,
Sure.
and the fact that we have.
Isn't that in our policies already?
A power leverage over them.
Bridget was saying.
Yeah.
So, we have a little bit of time, right? We're not really behind time. Yeah.
No, I think we're ahead of time, actually.
I mean, I think it's a really important topic, and it would actually be helpful for me, particularly because of the parent role, which does sort of.
It is hard.
To just talk more specifically about where that line should be drawn, right? Because it's very easy if it's, you know, your kid having a problem in your class, that there the line is easy and you kind of understand it. But, you know, if, as a parent, you're sort of seeing what's going on in the school and it sort of involves your kid, but it's also, it's like, you know, I think we need like another coach for this team, or I think, you know, we don't have enough resources in the cafeteria. You know what I mean? Like you sort of see things.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we should be more express really about where that line is, because I do think, because we're board members, you carry a different responsibility if you're going to a principal to raise issues that are going on in the school, even though they do affect your own child, but they're really more programmatic issues. And is that, do you think that line, you cross that line somewhere before you get to saying, you know, why isn't the library staffed for more hours? I'm just kind of making things up to try not to personalize it, but you know what I mean? Where do you think it is?
I'm not sure where it is. I mean, I think to be safe, if it goes beyond issues very specific to your own child, you might not have crossed it, but you're inching towards it. And I think also, like when I'm tempted to kind of notice or bring up those issues, I realize I have this role, that I have kind of a unique ability to notice those and then bring them to this forum and not necessarily raise them in other forums where it could, you know, it could be taken as kind of, you know, putting some pressure on an administrator. So,
does that work though? So if we look at Bridget's example, just with the library staffing. So if we come to the board and we decide to start talking about library staffing, all of a sudden, aren't we getting outside the bounds of policy governance or governance by policy, whatever we're calling it, and kind of making more directives for Libya to implement rather than us kind of trusting?
Wouldn't that be a board conversation of, is this something that the board in the whole is very interested in learning, or you, Ryan, are interested in doing? Because you're a librarian, you care a lot about libraries, and
sometimes that doesn't.
yeah, well, and that's another interesting line too. Like you obviously, you want to come in on behalf of the district, but if you're really seeing like a district-wide problem and you're and you kind of have a conversation that starts with your child, and then it starts to get to bigger issues that need to be addressed on a district level. And then obviously as, you know, as community members and people interacting with the schools, that's kind of how we oftentimes learn about what the needs are. You know, just kind of be mindful of when you're, I'm not sure there's a clear line, and it's you know, it's a hard role to play, but I think to kind of be mindful and be conservative.
But if you observe something, like the library staff, couldn't they send that to you and say, okay, I'm concerned, I
Yeah.
see this problem, or what I think is a problem, I need some data on it, or I need to hear what Libby thinks about this.
Or to say, if I were just a parent and not a board member,
I would
say something to the principal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm not gonna do it because I'm a board member, so I'm telling you, like, is that?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll share for the group, maybe a little bit of feedback, almost a disclaimer of sorts. You know, Libby did bring up, I have a professional connection in a sense to the school. Being the library director at the Roxbury Library, we obviously try to do activities and programs and coordinate things in conjunction with the school. I do my best to have the assistant director be the face for a lot of that, but small facility, that's not always the case.
The fact that you have an assistant director is impressive, Ryan.
We've done good in terms of management the last few years.
Yeah.
But I've always tried, it's always, you know, the library email account, like it's always, like it's just about something we're trying to do together. And I've never had an instance where somebody's expressed to me that they felt uncomfortable or this was kind of gray. but it's always in the back of my mind that, yeah, a lot of hats on right now, and I wanna make sure that it's clear that, yes, not making a programmatic suggestion, but wouldn't it be great if we could do this together?
But that's it, it's a small town, right? So things are they're fluid, and I think transparency has been my fallback. So when you get into those weird situations, you know, like for instance, just include Libby in the loop or whatever, and be like, I'm talking as a parent here, but I did that recently. I had an issue with a specialist, and I wanted to solve it with the teacher and the specialist. It was for my child, right? So I was dealing with this one thing, and little did I know the teacher was blind copying the principal, because they were concerned, like, what was going on here, you know, and they said, would you like me to include the principal in this? I'm like, no, I don't think we need the principal in this, right? And so there's this power dynamic that people are aware of that I wasn't even thinking about in terms, I was like, no, I just want to solve my problem for my kid right now. And so then I get a call from the principal saying, hey, would you like to talk? And I'm like, okay, right? And so I really loved that, and I thought she was great. Pam was great, because she was just making sure everything was okay, but everything was staying totally legit. The alternative could have been just copy the world on all that. And then it would be like, well, I'm not trying to like escalate this. So it's this multiple kind of thing that gets confusing.
No, it's definitely hard. And I think there's another line too, which is, I don't want to pull back on advocacy for my kid.
Right.
Because I feel I'm in a board role, and, you know.
You won't.
Well, and I won't, but, you know, but I also try to, you know, like, what would I do as a parent to give full advocacy to my child, and where might that come into like broader district policy that suddenly is inappropriate? So I think just be, you know, be very mindful. But I think the clear areas where it's not a problem is if you're talking to an administrator about something that doesn't have to do with your kid. If it's, you know, I need information on this. If you're talking to them as a board member, then the filter clearly goes here. And if you get into a situation where the conversation starts as a parent and you're starting to wonder, you know, then maybe think hard, and if it's, you know, if it's kind of going beyond parent advocacy, maybe reach out to one of us and say, here, I've got a situation, you know, do you think that I'm starting to go into a board member role here? So, anyway, since we're doing a check-in, I thought it would be good to raise that again. Any other comments or questions before we go into committees and kind of organizational committees? So kind of two major things on committees. There's a question about how to deal with the warning meetings by committees, whether for the whole board, Libby and Heather have been largely doing the warnings, but with committee meetings, it's been kind of ad hoc, and I don't think the expectations are super clear. They're technically committee meetings, and technically the committees have the obligation to do it. It's something that Libby could do if there was a desire to have it do. I know Bridget, for instance, does a great job of, she just directly goes to Heather. I've done it when we were doing the transportation meetings. So I think we should have a clear consensus on the board of whether the committee chair goes to Heather to warn meetings, or whether it's something that is a superintendent role.
I think it's the committee chair.
Committee chair, does anyone?
And Libby, is there any reason you need to do it? Can't
Yeah,
go directly
Just
to
go
Heather?
directly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, good.
You
I
don't
do.
need a middleman there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it came up with the negotiations, it wasn't warned, it turned out it didn't need to be, but I think there was some question about, well.
For negotiations, it was a question of negotiation session versus
Yes.
negotiation a committee meeting.
Yeah, but
Right.
it didn't come up until, you know, the night before the meeting, and fortunately, we didn't need to have it done, but I thought just given that situation, it would be good to, so committee chairs will do it. The second thing is for committees that meet fairly regularly, would it be good to maybe have a set time? And I don't know if this works at all for your schedule. For the finance committee, it does kind of work because we've been doing them before the presentations of the quarterly meeting. The negotiations committee, I think, is going to be really hard. For one, a lot of them don't need to be warned. Second, negotiations schedules, go through the union, and they also, kind of have an unpredictable pace and intensity to them. The only really active is the policy committee. I know, Bridget, if it would, if
we've never managed to have.
It just doesn't work.
We fixed
Regular schedule,
regular
no,
schedule.
it's been, we have these priorities right now, let's call it one conference and let's, I feel like it's necessary to have a scheduled monthly or bi-weekly meeting, as needed.
Okay, that's perfect.
Is there a rule in warning about how many? For example, if you scheduled 4 meetings, could you warn the 4 meetings all at once? Or do they have to be warned a certain amount of time before the meeting?
They have to be warned,
24 hours
24
more.
hours.
It's good to put an agenda on, so it would be hard probably to warn for.
Oh, okay.
And how far in advance?
24 hours.
At least 24.
Except for some, emergency meetings,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Okay, I think that's the only really committee that meets semi-regularly that doesn't have a pretty predictable schedule. And then, so any questions or comments on that?
Well, just to add to that, so you're wanting to establish regular meetings in order to sort of have them posted and accessible, and regular meetings don't have to be warned in the same way. So
Yeah, they don't
that
have-
partly just to have it more.
They don't have to be worn in the same way, and then it could be something that, say, Heather could kind of calendar, so it wouldn't,
Really? It doesn't have to be warned in the same way? If I said, I'm on a committee that's gonna meet once a week, for some reason, is that right? Would you, don't you have to warn it just the same?
Well, it's just like our regular board meetings aren't warned in the same way because we set a schedule.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was
Then we
wondering
post-
about, a list of, if you had a committee and they'd already set 4 meetings.
But you still post the agenda. in
Yeah, still
advance
post the
of
agenda.
meeting, So
Yeah.
there's other steps that
Yeah.
have to take place.
Yeah, I think there's 3 types of meetings. There's regular meetings, special meetings, and then emergency meetings. And the final thing is, I think we want to have a little discussion about the negotiations committee. Tina, now that the committee is more stocked and not just Tina, has decided that her previous desire never to ever be on the negotiations committee is a desire that she wants to rekindle.
Your run is over.
So,
That's excellent. So who does that leave?
So it leaves Ryan and Andrew, and I
So
just.
that's 2, and haven't we always had 2 people
Yeah.
on the?
So just to be clear, I have that same
desire. There is no doubt about it. This is true.
Andrew just doesn't know what he's getting into.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you're doing a great job.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to give mostly Ryan and Andrew's thoughts about whether they feel they're comfortable as a duo. And then the other question is, since we are starting to get into issues, getting some time with the board to go over what the issues are going to be and get some board consensus on
I think
how we
that's,
feel with that.
that's critical.
Yeah.
It's really important.
So we need some executive session time.
I think probably the
Next
5th,
meeting.
yeah.
Yes.
Do you think a half hour could do it if we do it quickly, or should we schedule more time?
I would suspect a half hour is probably reasonable. I mean, we've only gone through the ground rules at this point. It's going to be more general expectations, I think, than we don't have anything specific really, with the exception of some admin recommendations, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
No, I just think we should make sure we have a good kickoff in terms of our strategic direction or whatever we want it to be this year. So we're gonna need a little bit of time, so at least 30 minutes. The first time.
I agree.
Discussions take a long time.
They do. Longer than we always want them to.
Yeah, first meeting maybe 30 minutes, but after that, I remember.
But I think at the very outset, and I think this is what you're saying, Steve, is to kind of have the general approach ironed
That's
out,
what it
and
is.
yeah, and maybe our general tenets ironed out of.
Yeah, and just knowing what the realities are this year, getting all that takes a while. It might be 45 is what I'm trying to say. Never to happen twice, but
Okay.
whatever you guys think you can squeeze in, I think, is what you do.
Could people start at 5:45, or is that too early?
30 minutes?
Well, I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
thinking,
yeah.
the 5th is the public budget presentation, so I'd prefer not to push into that. I know 5:45 is early, but
On the 5th.
I mean, if we
probably
can
great
get
for Libby.
if we can get people here.
I could be here.
Maybe we can get a pizza.
And is the idea too, Jim and Libby, that that the administration during that time is going to present its proposals as well?
I can.
Well, so right now we have these proposals from the administration,
And we need to what
and we
all
don't
that
understand them,
means.
so.
I don't know how you can
So-
understand
No, I think they
that.
need to be, we need 45.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's meet at 5:45 then.
Okay.
We'll get food.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be food.
And I also have to be mindful that we can meet again, because I don't wanna push.
5:45?
I can, yes.
On December
Being
5th.
equitable to Roxbury
Yes.
and.
Again.
Actually, found out recently,
Okay.
the pizzas in Montpelier are way cheaper than Roxbury.
Ooh.
Way cheaper. Yes.
Bring them on.
Okay, so logistically, so theoretically, if Andrew and I are the two on the negotiation committee, I get really sick and I can't make a scheduled meeting. Is it okay for Andrew to be there by himself with just one person?
Well,
Yeah, actually, we did have 3 for a while. It's not true that we only always had 2.
Yeah, we did have 3.
We did have, there was 3. It was me, Jim, and Peter for a while.
Peter.
I just remember one time I did get really sick, like an hour before the
And-
The point is just
I mean,
not go.
I am willing to be, like,
I would be alternate too.
yeah, like the emergency goalie, like, who sits in the stands that they pull out when everybody else is dead and injured.
When everybody else has won the Powerball.
In terms of Libby's involvement and the attorney's involvement, et cetera, is that something that we want to save for next time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
By the way, if you want the Powerball, you have to go to negotiations committee.
What's that?
We'll do the whole, lay the groundwork next time,
Yeah.
when we do this. There's a lot to talk about.
I think there's quite a bit, yeah.
Perfect.
Are you about to go to the last item?
I think those are all the items.
Does anybody
but-
remember who last time said we should go talk to the Lions?
Oh,
Was that
yeah.
Michelle? I figured it was. I don't think there is a Lions in town. I've been trying to.
Is there an elk?
We're good on Rotary. I can't find the others, so I think they're like up at the Canadian Club, and I'm like, I'm not sure the Canadian Club.
Actually, they might be. I think there's a Kiwanis in Barry. I think they, yeah.
They're all in Barry. I'm like, I just, unless Michelle says otherwise, Michelle usually watches these.
Actually, I think it was I that said,
Did
when
you?
do we get, I just picked
No,
another.
there's no Lions nearby. I mean, they're in the Canadian Club, and we're not, I don't think they have any interest in
Okay.
our school budget. So, we're good with the Rotary.
Okay.
In January.
Thank you for
That's
checking.
quite all right. Anything else? I'm gonna quickly before we adjourn. Anything else on board governance? Anyone wants to pick any observations? Things we're doing well, things we're not doing well?
Ask maybe a general question. In a policy committee conversation, I had raised a question. In the last, 14 months, we've had a lot of conversations and discussions about we're not policy governance, we're governance by policy. Never formally said adopted anything besides conversations, would it make sense for us to have kind of a very short global policy essentially that says this is how we're trying to operate?
I thought we already did that.
Does that make sense, or would it be not necessary?
I thought we.
It would force us to define what governance by policy means.
Robert, do we look forward to that conversation?
I was gonna say,
Which might sound better than it defines. I'm agnostic about it. I think we could have it. My guess is it would take 45 minutes and it would end up on a sheet of paper and we'd warn it a few times and then it would sit in a binder somewhere.
Like I said, it just kind of came up, and here we are in progress update for board governance, and I throw it past the whole board. So.
Other thoughts? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? All those in favor? Aye. Thanks all.